But with no end to the conflict in sight, we've seen near daily strikes in or near Gaza's hospital compounds by Israel. The Geneva Conventions are a series of international treaties governing conduct during armed conflict, and we want to run you through what they say. The main message is very clear, that hospitals and medical personnel are off limits during war. Deliberate attacks on hospitals are considered a war crime. That includes strikes on healthcare facilities that aren't military targets. The conventions state medical staff and transportation, such as ambulances, must be protected. They also say medical personnel should be considered neutral players to be left alone to preserve and safeguard lives. A violation of these humanitarian principles have consequences, including legal prosecution. Cordula Droege is the Chief Legal Officer at the International Committee of the Red Cross, and you're joining us from Geneva. Thank you for your time today. You know, a lot of our viewers, they're watching the news and they're wondering what's legal, what's not legal. Now, a little disclaimer here. I know you don't want to address one specific event and be the judge of it on air for us, and we understand that. With that caveat out there, what is the general guideline? Because we are seeing strikes on hospitals, ambulances, all the things that we just said that according to the Geneva Convention, are not allowed, even in times of war.
Yes, the general rule is that hospitals, medical care, the medical functions, medical personnel, ambulances must not only be respected, but they must also be protected. And this is because they have a life-saving function always, but in war, of course, in particular. So the general rule is that they can't be attacked.
Okay.
Now,
sorry, go ahead.
The exception is if they are misused and used by the opposite side to commit acts harmful to the enemy. So, for instance, as weapons depots, as to hide able-bodied fighters, to launch attacks, then they can lose their protection against attack.
Okay.
That doesn't mean, though, that there's then a free license to attack, because any attack in armed conflict always has to still respect the principles of distinction between combatants and civilians, and between civilian objects and fighters, and the principles of proportionality and precaution. And what that means is that any attack on a part of a hospital still needs to take into account that the patients in the hospital, the medical personnel, the medical equipment, the medical supplies, all of this remains protected. And also don't forget that hospitals often are not just one place, they consist of many separate places. And so again, there you have to really just look at what is actually being used very specifically to be harmful to the enemy.
So we have heard during this conflict, Israel say that this or that medical target, whether it's a hospital, whether it's an ambulance, has lost its protection under international law because it was either used to shelter fighters, or because Israel believed that there was weapons in one of those places. How in the moment, how does one, how do our viewers make the determination whether it is therefore legal or not legal to strike that ambulance or that hospital?
Whether it's legal or not legal to strike really depends on the facts on the ground, and whether in actual fact the party has really verified that a part of a military installation is used for acts harmful to the enemy. But as I said, don't forget, in the hospital, in the ambulance, there are patients. In the case of Gaza, there are, of course, also people who have sought refuge. So civilians will be present, patients will be present, medical personnel will be present. And that needs to be taken into account as well in determining the lawfulness of the attack.
So I suppose that's when we come to this issue of proportionality, right? If it's a strike on a target that has civilians or maybe even patients and medical teams, you're saying even in the event that the party that conducts that strike were able to prove that the target had been used for military purpose, there needs to be proportionality in the strike. Am I getting this right?
Absolutely. And even before we're talking about attacks on hospitals, I think what we also need to look at in wartime is that hospitals need to continue functioning in their medical function. And this requires that they have the medical supplies, the equipment, the water, the food for the patients necessary for their functioning. And therefore also, it is an obligation of all parties in a conflict to allow and facilitate humanitarian relief to reach hospitals, medical equipment, and also medical personnel to be able to reach the areas where the patients are in order to treat them. And if that isn't done, then the hospitals will cease to function and will not be able to treat the patients, even though that is this utmost basic tenet of international humanitarian law, is that patients, the wounded and sick, need to be cared for.
Okay, thank you so much for laying all of that out, because it's a question we've been asking over and over again, really, since the beginning of this conflict, but we keep trying to finesse it and update it because as people watch the news, that's one of the big questions that they have. Cordula Droege, Chief Legal Officer at the International Committee of the Red Cross, thank you.
Thank you.